What if you could write a program that will give you the available time slots when you want to meet your friends? So in this one, we will write a program that will show you the available time slots for a group of people based on the busy time each person has. And it doesn't really matter how much people want to meet in the same time, this project will support to show you the proper results even if 100 people want to meet in the same exact time. So this project is going to be developed with Dataclasses. Dataclasses is much nicer way to write classes in Python. So if you did not hear about Dataclasses, I really recommend watching my previous upload, where I explain deeply what are data classes and how they should be used. And so it might be a great idea watching this one before you continue writing this project together with me. So if you will enjoy here, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel, and let's get started. So Python 3.9 is going to be the version that we're going to use. Be sure to use that or any version that is above Python 3.9. And any ID that you prefer that you want to write this project should be good enough. Okay, so the first thing that we want to understand before going ahead with this project is the fact that we are going to have a lot of time calculations. Now, libraries like datetime or time could be very useful in this case, but at the end of the day, we are going to calculate a lot of subtractions when it comes to decreasing 4 o'clock minus 3 o'clock, for example, and we want to return in that case maybe 60 because there are 60 minutes between those time ranges. Now, again, those are achievable with the datetime library, but this library requires a lot of formatting of the times or the date times, so that's why it is a great idea to create our own data type to calculate time ranges. Now, we are going to assume that those people that look for a time slot to meet are only going to meet in one single day. So I can actually go ahead and draw something like this. So we have 1440 minutes in a day, like 60 times 24. And so that means that the first minute of the day is 0 and the last minute of the day is that number minus 1. So if someone is going to be busy, for example, in 23:59, then it means that this is the last minute of the day, right? So what we are going to do now is to write a class that will support something like the following. So we will give this class an argument like 0005, and this class will know how much minutes passed from the beginning of the day. And that is going to be important because this is what is going to help us a lot when we want to calculate time ranges. So for example, if we are going to have a class like TimeRange that is going to receive this one as an argument, then it should return 5 because it's been 5 minutes from the beginning of the day. So let's go ahead and write such a class. We are going to name this class TimeRange, and let's go ahead and get started. So we are going to make this class a data class, and that means that we should import from data classes, import data class, and we are going to use this decorator, and then we are going to go ahead and name our class here, class TimeRange, like that. Okay, so this class is at first stage is going to receive two fields. One will be the start time as a string, and the second one will be end time, again as a string. So this could be something like, let's say 0030, and the other one could be something like 5 o'clock, right? Something like that. So once we have this, let's go ahead and see what will be an instance of that as we try to print it. So I can go ahead and create an instance, and the start time will be equal to, let's actually use those examples. End time is going to be equal to 0500. And once we go ahead and print this, then you can see that this is the result that we see here. Now we know that the most important part of this class is at the end of the day to go ahead and have the ability to use this end time minus that start time. So that is why we should be also receiving a couple of more fields here that are not going to be fields that are going to be instantiated. We are going to just make those fields assigned to none, and then later on we are going to calculate their values. So for example, if we want to have something like start minutes that is going to be an integer by default, we cannot allow ourselves to basically leave it as it is, because the time range is going to expect from us to provide in here start minutes. But I don't want to do that. I want to automatically assign to start minutes the number of 30, because it has been 30 minutes since the start of the day. So that's why we should be using some logic that is quite different. So we should be going ahead and use a field here that is going to be custom. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is going to be an integer that is going to be equal to a custom field, but it should not be initialized. So init equals to false, and you can see that this warning here has been disappeared. And I'm going to do the same for the end minutes, right? This is going to be the thing that we want to, this one 30, this one 300. So again, the same logic, we want to somehow take the end time string and be able to return the number of 300 out of it. So we already know that we must come up with a function that will receive a time string in that format and should return the amount of minutes. So that is why I'm going to allow myself to do something that will look like the following. I will create a new file that we can name it helpers, and I will just throw here all the functions that I want to use throughout my program that is not specifically related to the data that is supposed to be maintained in the TimeRange class. So I can go ahead and create a function here that we could name TimeRange to minutes, and that is just going to receive a time range string, right? This could be any time range string that we want, that we decided. Now, a doc string here that we could write could be something like return amount of minutes for time ranges in format HH colon M like that. Just represent the hour and the minute. Okay, so once we have something like this, then let's understand what we have to do here. So assuming that we have something like the following, obviously we want to take the first number between the columns and we want to multiply this by 60. Now we understand that once we use something like dot split, once we execute t underscore str dot split, then the result of this one is going to be always a string, because this is a string and that is a string as well. And obviously the split is going to be by a colon. So let's go ahead and see an example of this. So I'm going to go ahead and use how str is equal to this one, and we want the index of 0 because we want to receive this one back. Okay, so now just to begin with it, let's go ahead and print how str and also minutes str, right? And this is obviously going to be very similar attribute here, a variable minutes str, and that's going to access the index number 1. Okay, so assuming that we are calling this function time range to minutes, let's go ahead and use this one, and now I'm going to launch this file. You can see that we received the expected result. Now we know that we should convert those into integers, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that for this one and also for that one. If we print this, then yes, we receive the expected result. But we know that in order to convert hours to minutes and then to add those to each other, we want to multiply this by 60, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to separate this into a different variable. I'm going to go ahead and say how to minutes is equal to how string multiplied by 60, right? And then I can go ahead and remove those lines, and I can simply return how to minutes, the variable that we use here, plus minutes like that. And I'm starting to think that the underscore str is a little bit unnecessary here, because those are variables that are not representing strings now. So I'm going to take those off from those variables. also from here and as well as from here. So excuse me about that one. Okay, so now that we have done this and we actually return this value, we need to print this in order to really see the results, right? So I'm going to print that and we should see 300. Okay, so this is the result. If we change this to 15 minutes past 5, then we should see 315. Great result. Let's use a larger number here, like 20. Okay, so still works. Change this a bit more. Okay, so this is a great function to start with it. Now, obviously, in the future, we want to design a function that does the exact opposite action. So we will write this probably in the future throughout this program. So I'm going to delete that and continue from here. Okay, so now that we have done this, then I'm going to go ahead and basically import all the helpers function. I'm going to do something like import helpers as h, just a short variable that will represent the helper functions. And then I can go ahead and basically do something like the following. Now in data classes, there is something that you might not see before, but there is a method that is called post_init. Post_init is a method that is obviously called after the init method. So what you can do in the post_init magic method is assigning fields that still did not receive values yet, like this one and that one. So I'm going to go ahead and use double underscore post_init, and I'm going to assign values for those attributes. I'm going to go ahead and say that self.start minutes is going to be equal to h dot time range to minutes, and this is going to obviously receive a time range string like we define here. So it should be self.start underscore time, and the similar action is going to be also with the end minutes, right? We are going to just use a Control D here to duplicate this line. I'm going to change this to end and this one to end as well. Okay, so now that we understood this, let's try to see how the object is going to be look like once we print it. Now, if we go ahead and run our main.py file, and I run this in debug mode by mistake, but that's good enough. Now, you can see that we see this result here. So this means that data classes take automatically each field and adds it to our EPR. Now, it could have been nicer if we could avoid actually those pieces of information. Those are going to be useful to do some background calculation, but in fact, it makes a lot of sense to only display the start time, end time, because the class is named TimeRange. So that just makes more sense. So I can go ahead and use here REPR equals to false as well. And I think that will be it about this class now. Okay, so if we print this again, you can see that we see this result. Okay, so now that we wrote a little bit about our TimeRange class, we will get back to this class later on, but now let's understand what we are going to do with this class and how we are going to create some objects of it. Now, we know that our application is going to include a couple of people, so it totally makes sense to come up with a new class that will represent people so that we could go ahead and create objects, and then we can assign busy time ranges for each person. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So I'm going to delete this object that I created for debugging reasons, and I'm going to basically move all the code from here to a separated file that will represent the time range object. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create a new file that will call time range, and then I'm going to Control X my entire code from here, and I'm going to just paste this in, and this should work without any surprises. So I'm going to leave this here, close this temporarily, and in our files we are going to start here a new file that we could name friend. Now we said that we like to basically create few friend objects and add to each friend object some busy time ranges, and then we will see how we will calculate the free time. Okay, so now that we created this file, let's go ahead and start with some imports that we are probably going to use. So the first one is going to be the helpers function that maybe we will use, so I will import it as h, and I'm also going to import the time range. So from time range import TimeRange class, and in addition I'm also going to import the data classes. So from data classes import data class like that. Okay, so now we should go ahead and create a new class that we could name friend, and we could think about some great attributes that this friend class could receive. One thing is obviously a name, right? So we can identify each of the friends. So this is just going to be a string, and the other one is going to be busy time ranges. The reason that I'm doing this is because it is going to be much easier in the future to exclude all the busy time ranges from all the friends, and then basically identify what are the time ranges that were never busy among all the friends, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just call this attribute busy time ranges. Now we can understand that this is not going to be a regular attribute. We know that this should be a list of time ranges, and that's going to be a little bit tricky to let the data class understand what kind of object you want to use here. So it is going to be the built-in keyword of list followed by the type of object, which will be time range. Now I forgot actually to add here the decorator of data class, so let's do that quickly. Okay, so now if we look in this line, if you used Python 3.8 or older versions, this is where you are going to have some trouble, because this is a syntax that is only supported from Python 3.9 or above. So again, this is why I really asked you guys to use Python 3.9 or any version that is above that, and that's basically an important point that I wanted to specify about this one. So now that we came up with this, then we need to tell to busy time ranges that to automatically start an empty list. Now this is going to be by basically make that to be equal to a field, and then say that the default underscore factory is just a list like that. Okay, so I forgot to import the field from the data classes, so let's go ahead and do that. Perfect. Okay, so you might be confused about the continuation of this line, but basically when it comes to instantiating attributes with data classes, using the type hint is not enough. You should also go ahead and specify some temporal default value for the kind of value that you want to maintain, and that's the reason that I came up with the customization of field, and I said that the default factory is going to be a list. Now one more reason that I used field here, it is because in the future I'm going to specify that the RAPR is going to be false, because I don't want my object to have too much characters included. So that's why RAPR is going to be equal to false here. Okay, so now that we have done this, testing this temporally is a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and say that f1 is equal to a friend, name could be Jim, and then let's go ahead and try this out. So if we print the object, let's execute the friend.py file, then you can see that the result is as expected. Now it might be a great idea to have the control of adding the busy time ranges in each object separately. So in order to follow the OOP principles in that case, it is a perfect idea to come up with a method, and this method will handle for us the addition of the busy time ranges to that attribute. So I can go ahead and use a method here that we could name add busy range, something like that, and then this method will take care of doing that. And this method is going to receive one parameter, and we could name it something like object, because that's just going to be a time range object. In addition, you can use a type hint like the following, right? So if someone comes up with an object of integer, then it is just going to avoid that. It is going to raise an exception. Okay, so now we could go ahead and say self.busy time ranges dot append, and now we should go ahead and just basically add the object, right? So now that we have done this, let's test this out. We are going to go ahead and use f1 dot add busy range, and then we are going to include here a time range object that is going to be instantiated, and we are going to pass in the following attributes. So start time, let's say that I'm busy from 9 o'clock to 5. Okay, 5 p.m. So I will just specify it with 17. Okay, so now if we go ahead and print this, then you can see that it works. Now I can also go ahead and say, in order to test ourselves, that we'd like to print the busy time ranges. Let's see the result. Okay, so this is perfect because you can totally see a list of time ranges, and it wouldn't matter if I would add one more. Let's go ahead and add here that I'm also busy from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. If I run this again, you can see that the result is as expected. Okay, so perfect job until now. Now we will see how we will identify free times among two friends or more than two friends. Okay, so now we also designed the friend class. Let's go ahead to our main.py file and work on that, because this will be our entry point to the entire project, where we will calculate the entire free times that are available. So let's take those dummy instances from here and work on the main.py file now. So I'm going to go ahead and import from TimeRange, import TimeRange, and also from friend, import friend, like that. And since this is going to be the entry point, then it totally makes sense to use the if double underscore name equals to double underscore main to really validate that the chunk of code that we are going to write is only going to execute once we run this file directly. Now I'm going to go ahead and say if double underscore name equals double underscore main, and then I'm going to pass temporally, and then it is a great idea to maybe go ahead and create our main function, and here actually using the pass, and here we might go ahead and execute the main function. And now we will work on this class. So it means that whatever we want to do now, we will write this inside this function. Okay, so now let's go ahead and understand how we are going to calculate the free times. Now, earlier in this video, we explained that each day has 1440 minutes, starting from 0 until 1439, right? And we said that we are going to basically check every minute throughout the day, and we are going to see if someone is busy in that time. So this means, for example, if a guy that is named Jim is not available from 12 a.m., so to speak, until 10 a.m., so I will mark this as 600, because 10 a.m. basically means that it has been 600 minutes since the beginning of the day, then I'm just going to skip those minutes from here and I'm not going to do with it anything. But if I see that, for example, from 10 a.m. until 23:59 everybody is free, then we are going to grab the sections of the minutes and we are going to add it to a list like 3 minutes or something in that kind. Now, by using such a logic, it really doesn't going to matter how much friend objects we are going to have, because, for example, let's take another guy here. So friend number 2 is Chris. Let's assume that Chris is not going to be available from 8 p.m. So this means that from 1200 minutes since the start of the day, this guy is not going to be available. So I'm going to take off this section. So we're left with 10 a.m. until 8 p.m. that is the free time. So this really means that we could iterate over as much as friends we would like to, and always the goal is going to be to check if someone is busy in that moment. And if any range of minutes is going to remain in the list of minutes, then it means that this is a free time that everyone could meet. Okay, so let's see this thing in Python code, because sometimes too much theory just makes it more confusing. Let's go ahead and write this down. So let me delete everything from here and let's go ahead and continue. So we are going to go here and we will start first with 2 friends, so it will be easier to also check the bugs throughout the way if we are going to have any bugs. Let's see. Alright, so friend 1 again, right? I'm going to go ahead and create a new friend. Let's use the names that we used, and the second one is going to be Chris. Okay, excuse me, Chris, like that. Now I'm going to add at least one busy time range to each of the friends here. So let's go ahead and say that add busy range for Jim, and it could have been better if we could keep the busy ranges for each friend right after another for readability. Okay, so add busy range, it's going to be a time range object, and start time is going to be, let's give it 8 a.m. obviously inside double quotes, and the end time is going to be 10 a.m. like that. Okay, so now that we have done this for Jim, let's go ahead and do this for the second friend, right? I'm going to pretty much copy and paste this, but only change from, let's say, 10, let's use 12 to 14, like that. Okay, so now that we came up with some list of friends, let's go ahead and start working our logic. Now, we know that we should iterate over all the numbers from 0 to 1439 because of what we explained a couple of minutes ago. So this is what I'm going to start by. I'm going to start by iterating over those list of numbers. So this means that I can go ahead and say for I in range, and this will be obviously 1440 because when we use the range built-in function, the last number is always not included. Just to see that we are right in that case, we can go ahead and execute the main.py file, and you can see that I receive all the numbers until that one. So this means that we have done a great job. Okay, so now that we have this, we need to understand that for each busy ranges for each friends, we also need to have the version of the not available minutes each friend has. So for example, for Jim, basically it means that from minute 480 until 600, he is not available, right? But we don't have any kind of any field that describes it in the TimeRange class or in the friend class. So this means that we need to take care of it in order to easily access an attribute like minutes busy range, something that will really describe what are the exact minutes this guy is not available. So let's take care of this in the TimeRange class, okay? So you can see that for the TimeRange class, we have some fields like start time, end time, start minutes, and end minutes. But we don't have anything that is kind of describing the range of minutes like we want. So for example, let's take a look in the comment example. It could have been great if we could also have a list that includes all the integers between 30 to 300 in that case. So let's go ahead and take care of this. So I'm going to go ahead and start here a new attribute, and I'm going to name this minutes underscore range, or range minutes, doesn't really matter. And this one is going to have a different kind of object that is going to be range, because we know that this should be a range, right? And that's going to be equal to a field that is not going to be initialized, and also it is not going to be included inside the RAPR. And this means that we should take care of the value for this one in the post_init method. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of it. So I'm going to say that self.minutesRange is going to be equal to a range where the starting number is going to be the self.startMinutes, start minutes, and the end value for the range is going to be self.endMinutes, and the step is going to be 1 because we want each single minute. But the default value is 1, but we could just include 1 here for readability, and that's okay. Okay, so now that we have done this, let's see how beneficial it is going to be for us now. So if we go back to our main.py file, leave this print line, and right after we print each line, let's also see the minutes range attribute for each of the friends. So let's temporarily comment this out, and let's go ahead and say that we like to print f1 dot busy time ranges. Let's see what we will get back. Probably a list with this single time range. Okay, great result. And then let's show the attribute that we just created. So I'm going to just randomly access the index 0 because we have 1 here in this list. And then if I use a dot here, you can see that I have auto-completion for all the attributes because it is a time range object here. So we could go ahead and try to print the minutes range, and the result is going to be just as expected. It is just a list of all the integers between 480 to 600, which is perfect because this is exactly what we need from this start and end time. And if we go ahead and convert this entire expression to a list, this is what exactly we want. So just a perfect result to really get started with it, because now in our iteration we could check if for each busy time ranges this integer is included, right, while we iterate over all the available minutes. And then this is going to help us a lot to bring in the free minutes from all the minutes list that we have. Now, continuing from here, let's first of all see something that is going to work for us. Now, we don't want to be too much dynamic in the beginning because it could be too much problematic to try to fix the bugs later on. So let's go easier, okay? So first of all, let's comment out this F2 friend here. Let's try to make this program work with only one friend and with only one busy range per friend. So this means that I can leave those two lines, and now let's continue from here. Now, first of all, it might be a better idea to maintain a list of all the available minutes throughout the day, and later on delete elements from that list if there are going to be any numbers that are busy for some friend. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say that available minutes is just a range of all the integers from 0 to 1440. And now that we have something like this, then basically we can fix those lines that are already commented out. So I'm just going to delete those, and I'm also going to delete this line that we just printed for testing reasons, and I'm going to say something like the following. So a for loop for m in available minutes, then now we can basically say if one of the iterated minutes, meaning values, is inside a busy range minute, then it means that we can delete that element from the list because it is no more an available minute that those group of people could meet. So I can go ahead here and say if m is inside the single time range that we have until now. So I can go ahead and basically use here in f1 dot busy time ranges, and if you remember, busy time ranges returns a list. So this means that temporarily I can allow myself to access only the 0 index because we have one busy range. So 0, and then if we use a dot, then you can see that some attributes are recognized because it is a time range object. And I'm going to relate to the minutes range new attribute that we came up with because it maintains range object. Not time range object that we actually created, but the built-in range object that maintains all the integers from the given numbers. And in that case, it will be from 480 until 600, meaning 599 because the last number is not included in the range function, but we will see that just in a minute. Okay, so if that is the case, then we want to delete the integers from the available minutes because that is totally an indication about how those minutes are not minutes that those people could meet, right? So I can go ahead and say available minutes dot remove, and remove is not going to work for us because that is not a list, that is just a range object. So we should convert this to a list and then continue from here. Okay, so inside here we should go ahead and say available minutes dot remove, and basically we should remove m, right? Because m is the integer that we iterate over available minutes. Now, a super important note about removing elements while you use a for loop. It is not a good practice removing elements inside the list while you iterate over the elements in that list. So this means, in that case, if I go ahead and I iterate over the element and I remove some element while I iterate, I could have a lot of trouble in the future. And I'm saying this from experience because I wasted hours figuring out what was wrong in one of my programs, and basically deleting elements inside a for loop could really screw up your entire program. So that's why what I really like to do in that cases is to use a copy of the original list that I'm iterating on. Let me show you how that's going to work. So if we open a Python shell very quickly, let's do that here. And here I'm going to say that let's create a random list here with 3 numbers. Now we are already familiar with how to index a list. So for example, if you do something like 2:, you will receive all the elements that are starting from index number 2, and if you do something like A:2, then you will receive all the elements until index number 2. But if you do something like that, then you will originally receive the same list back. So this means that you can use the list and then square brackets colon inside to really copy your list. So this means that I can go back to my program and not originally iterate over the list that I maintain here. So I can go ahead and say for m in available minutes, but like that. Okay, so this will be just a better implementation how to remove elements from a list while you use a for loop. Okay, so now that we came up with this, let's see if we have done a great job. So I'm going to go ahead and print the available minutes. So what we expect now, we expect to see a list of all the integers, but only 480 until 600, originally 599, should be excluded. So if I run this program, okay, so we should scroll to see if the results are as expected. Okay, so perfect result. And why is that? It's because we see 479 and we see just all the expected integers that are not here. So the next element is 600, which is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. So a perfect start until now. Let's see how we are going to make this program more generic. Okay, so we are back in our friend class because we should think of a way how to maintain all the minutes range in one list, because it is a bad practice hard coding this in that way like we did previously, but we only did that for testing purposes. Okay, so back in our friend class, we could actually think of a great way maintaining all the range objects that are busy time ranges that we basically could relate to it with only one attribute. So it could have been perfect if we could only go ahead and say print and basically access a class attribute like all busy minutes range, right? So this could have been great, because if this will return a list that will look like the following, for example, range, I don't know, 0 to 60, and also, you don't have to write this down, I'm just doing this for example reasons. So if we could somehow receive a list back that will look like the following, this will be perfect for us. Now, the best way that we could start doing this, as I mentioned a minute ago, could be with a class attribute, because a class attribute, usually its purpose is to maintain some attributes that are not specifically related to one single instance, and that could be a great idea to creating a class attribute here. Now, creating a class attribute in a data class is not as easy as just going ahead and creating your new variable, because otherwise the class is going to think, the data class is going to think that it is a regular instance variable that should be initialized. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and use something from the typing library. Now, the typing library includes a section, just a class that is called class var. So by using this typing, so-called, we could let the data class understand that we are going to use a class attribute. Now, the way that this is going to work is the following way. So we are going to say all underscore busy minutes underscore range, and that's going to be, colon, and that's going to be a class variable that will be just a list. So that's why I'm using this syntax. Now, I'm also going to give it a default value, and that's just going to be an empty list. Now, you might already notice that this entire syntax is totally different than that one, because we don't want to make this a field, an instance field, and that's why it is a bit different. Okay, so now if we really go ahead and try to print something like this, so this means that we should execute the friend.py file, then you can see that I receive an empty list. Now, what we can do now is to add something in addition in the add busy range method, so that we will also have in the all busy minutes range a list like the following. So it could have been a great idea for every time that the add busy range method is used, also adding the minutes range to that list. and let's see how that is going to work. So let's leave this line as it is, and let's go down and say something like that. Add the minutes range object to a class attribute. Now let's see what we are going to do here. We are going to go ahead and say friend dot all busy minutes range dot append, and then basically we are going to add the object of the time range here as well. Now if we do something like this, I want you to notice what we will have once we print the class attribute in here. So I'm adding the object. Now for testing reasons, let's create a quick object here. Again, just f1 is equal to friend. Okay, name is required, so we will pass in just a short name with one character, and then we will add a busy time range. Now to save us a little bit of time, then let me please grab this from here, from the main.py file, and basically paste this in. Let me delete this comment and execute our program. So let's see the result of this print line here. Again, pay attention to execute the friend.py file because we are kind of debugging our program and we are just in the middle of testing some new feature that we add. Okay, so you can see that this attribute returns us this one, but we don't want this one. We want the range object. So this means that we should not append the object itself, but we should append an attribute from that object. So if we go ahead and append the minutes range, this is exactly what we want. Okay, if we execute the friend file, you can see that this is exactly what we receive. And now we could duplicate this line and see if that is going to work for multiple busy ranges. So 11 from 15, let's say. Okay, so it works. Now we have all the busy minutes with the range object for all the friends, and that is exactly what we were looking for. I know that we worked a little bit hard for that, but now we are really having something that is going to be very valuable in the future. Okay, so don't forget to delete those 4 lines because those were for testing purposes, and let's go back to our main.py file now. Now, if we go back to our main.py file, you remember that the problematic line is that line. This is where we hard code accessing the busy time ranges minutes range attribute here. Okay, so besides using this, let's go now and uncomment those lines, right? Let's allow ourselves using one more friend object here. Now, if we do not print this one, but we go ahead and print friend dot all busy minutes range, we should see all the minutes range like we expect, right? And this is exactly what happens. We see from 720 to 840 because those are the times, so perfect result. Okay, so now let's take care of this line. Now, we don't want to check if the minute is inside this minutes range, but besides, we want to use a for loop. So let's go here and say for r in, r representing a single range object that we iterate, friend dot, basically this statement, right? Friend dot all busy minutes range. Let me bring this one and copy and paste this here and remove this print line and use a colon here. Now, once we have something like this, then we could automatically indent inside this for loop, but only check if m is inside r, right? So this should take care of removing all the busy ranges finally. Okay, so now in order to check if that's going to work for us, now I'm going to print the available minutes list that is coming from here. But now we need to check 2 things. Before that, we checked only if the integers between 480 until 599 were not existing. But this time we should also check if numbers from 720 until 839 is not available, right? So let's check that. Okay, so we are going to run our main.py file. Let's make this bigger and check that out. So let's start with 480. Okay, so works perfectly. And let's check for 720. Okay, so again, perfect result. After 719, we don't see it. So perfect result. We really now can go ahead and play around with as much as friends as we like and as much as busy ranges that we like. But actually, I'm going to surprise you because we are going to have some trouble in cases where there is going to be a collision between people that are not available, meaning they are busy in the same time. Let me simulate you that. So we are going to go ahead and for the Chris object, for the friend number 2, we are going to make this guy not available pretty much in the same time like Jim. So let's change this from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m. Now, we are going to have problem here because at first the available minutes is going to check for integers between 480 to 600 and it is just going to try to remove it. But then Chris will come, okay? The busy range for Chris will also start iterating, but then it is going to also try to remove the 480, but now we are going to have an exception that 480 is not even existing because this is not an integer that exists in a list. So this means that the remove method is going to throw an exception for the Chris method. And let's see this in action. So if we execute this, then you can see that we have for list.remove x is not in list. So this means that we should try except removing elements from that list. And that is because sometimes we could have elements that are already deleted from previous friends. And again, that's why we should wrap this up with try except. Now, using try except is an option, but I really like to have another option. What if we could have inside a list a method that is looking like remove if exist? But unfortunately, we don't have a method that is built in inside the built-in list object. But we could create our own list object. And that is going to be very cool to see how we are going to do that. So let's go through that and code this right now. Let's create our own list object that are going to have some special behaviors, and that is something that is totally acceptable in Python because you could take the objects and you could do whatever you want with them. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So we are going to go ahead and create a separated file that I'm going to name it custom_list. Now, inside this file, we are basically going to just go ahead and say that we will have a custom list. Now, this is going to inherit from the original list class because we want to use all the functionalities of the list, but only we want to add to it one more method that we want to name it remove if exist, right? So this means that inside here, I can go ahead and say, let's create a method that is really exact in the name that we'd like to. So remove underscore if exist. But if it is not inside the list, then just do nothing. You can see that we have self as an auto-completion. Basically, self will relate to the list object that is going to be instantiated from the parent class that we inherit here. Okay, so now we can go ahead and say try, and then we should go ahead and say self.remove, but what we are going to remove. And then we basically want to remove some element that someone asks in the remove if exists method. So this method should accept a parameter, and let's just give it a name of v, and let's try to remove v. Now, if we use a try for that, then this should be followed up by except, obviously, and if we fail with some exception. Now, previously we failed with a very specific exception that was, let's check that, okay, value error. So it means that we can catch up value error in the exception. So I'm going to go ahead and say except value error, and then if that's the case, then temporarily I'm going to print v already deleted. Right? So I'm going to print this because I really want you guys to see what will happen if you try to use this method from this custom class that we create to add some methods to the existing list class. Okay, so now that we have done this, then I'm going to go back to our main file and I'm going to import it from custom list import custom list, and then basically I'm going to go ahead and change this list into being a custom list because we created that for a great reason. And you can see that the warning from here disappeared. And now I can execute again my program, and you can see how the result is just beautiful. You can totally see that we see those print lines for already deleted lines because that happens in the case of Chris. And that is just something that is really beautiful that I really like to use sometimes, taking the built-in objects and just override them or add them some functionalities that will be useful throughout my program. And that is a perfect scenario where you can implement your additions to the list object. Now, before we continue writing the project, let's temporarily delete the print line because it is going to be annoying to see those print lines for each time that we try to delete something. So we could replace this with pass, and this should be enough. If we execute it, again, just the expected behavior. Values are deleted between 480 to 599, and as well as for the rest of the values, you can see that the next number starts from 840 because if you remember, let's go back to our main.py file, you can see that the other busy range is from 8 to 2 p.m. So it means that all the values between 480 to 839 should be deleted, which is really as expected. Alright, so the way that we are going to finalize this project is by writing a function that will know to take the large amount of integers that are coming from available minutes, and then basically now we need to convert those into time ranges. Now the reason that we have to do this is because if we again execute our main.py file, then we can definitely see that we have a large list of integers. So this means that in some way we need to know that from 0 to that number, this is a time range. And what is common among all the integers between 0 to 479, it is the fact that all the numbers are having the same difference between the previous elements. So for example, take a look at 469. If we subtract this one with 468, there is a 1 minute difference. So this is a fact that we might rely on to bring in time ranges. And we also need to remember that, for example, for number 840, we need to know that from now on, from 2 p.m. until 11:59, this is also time range. So that's the function that we should write right now, because we cannot leave it as it is. Integers doesn't really mean anything to the users of the program. So let's go ahead and write a function that will prettify the available minutes list and will give us back a nice time ranges list. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead to my helpers.py, and here we are going to write a function that we might name prettify minutes or available minutes, just to really indicate that we are going to do it for the available minutes variable that is inside the main.py file. Now I'm not going to receive temporarily any list in the parameter. Besides, I'm going to use a dummy list inside my function just so it will be easier to explain the concepts that I will implement in this function. So I'm going to write here a list that will be quite similar to the list that is originally in the main.py file. So I'm just going to write 0, 1, 2 and 60, 61, 62 like that. So we will have something easy to work with. Alright, so now we need to think of a way how we can group this list. Now the desired list that we want to have might look something like the following. So let's comment this out. Group the list so that we will have something like that. Okay, we will have a nested list, okay, where the first list will have 0, 1, and 2, and the second list will be 60, 61, 62. So it is kind of an action that is called aggregate. So we are trying to aggregate this list by the fact that each number followed by the other number, their difference is only 1. And if we are in a situation where the current value is 60 and the previous one is 2, then we want to start a new group, right? So that's what we're going to implement now. This is the algorithm that we're going to write right now. Okay, so let's see how we want to do this. So we have a list here that includes 0, 1, 2, 60, 61, 62, right? And we want to iterate over those values. So here we start an iteration. So at first we have this 0. Now I'm saying that, okay, let's create a separated list here and add the 0 here, okay? This is the first step in the iteration, in the first value that we iterate. Now the next step is 1, right? And let's validate if 1 minus 1 is 0, and if that's the case, let's add it to the yellow list. Okay, so until now we are good. So in the next iteration we are having 2. So again, let's do the same validation. 2 minus 1 is equal to the latest value of 1, and if that's the case, let's add it to here. So you can see that unless I'm checking if the current iterated element minus 1 equals to the latest value in the yellow list, then I should keep adding the element to the yellow list. But in the next time, I'm iterating over 60. 60 minus 1 is not equal to 2. So what I will do now is I will save my yellow list aside, because this is a range of values. I will save it here as a collection of numbers that is 0, 1, 2, and then I will remove everything from this list and keep working again on a new time range, right? So now I'm having the value of 60 and I emptied the list. So now we can add this value back again here. So 60. So what is the next value that we iterate on? So we have 61. 61 minus 1 is 60. So we can add it to the yellow list. And the same goes with 62, right? We can add 62 here. And since we reached the end of the iteration, then this is a collection that we can save aside as well. So we'll have another list with 60, 61, and 62. And there you go, we have the aggregation. We have the grouping that we wanted, right? We have a time range that indicates 0, 1, 2 and 60, 61, 62. So that is the separation that we want. And now that we understood the algorithm of how to implement this, I don't know the professional name of this algorithm, but let's do that and let's implement this with Python now. Alright, so back to PyCharm, let's implement what we drew a few minutes ago. So I'm going to go ahead and say that list resetable is going to be equal to an empty list. And then I'm going to start the iteration here for element in L. And then I will say that if the list is empty in the first stage, let's add the element. I'm fine with it. So if list resetable is equal to an empty list, let's add it. So list resetable dot append element, and then we don't want to do anything, right? After that, here is the exact step that I want to stop doing any action. So I can say continue to automatically jump to the next iteration. So in the case that we start with 0, in continue we will iterate over 1 now, and everything will restart again. Okay, so now we can check the logic that we checked how to add an element to the yellow list, so-called, right? So I can go ahead and say if the latest element in the list resetable, that is going to be by -1 index, so last element of this list plus 1, if that's equal to the element that we iterate on, then we should keep adding to that list, right? So I'm going to say list resetable dot append, let's add the element. Now, if that is no more the case, right, if the difference is not 1 between those values, so else, then I want to save aside my list resetable before I reset it. So what I can do is I can create again one more list that I can name group list. And if you remember, this is the stuff that I draw with the pink color before, right? So this is a grouped list, which is going to be a nested list right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save my list resetable in the group list. So it will be group list dot append, and I will just add a copy of my list recitable. Excuse me, so it should be list recitable, and if you remember, we already used this trick with the saving a copy of an original list. So I'm using this syntax with index colon and basically square brackets with the colon inside. Okay, so now I can go ahead and say that I'd like to reset my list, so list recitable dot clear. And then if you remember, when we draw how we want to implement this entire algorithm, after cleaning everything from the yellow list, so-called, we added the current element that we iterate on. So to speak, if now we are iterating over 60 and 2 plus 1 is not equal to 60, right? So we end up with the else statement. So now we want to add the 60 to the list recitable so that next time the number of 61 will know to implement the same logic with the 60 that has been added here. So after cleaning everything, then I should add the current element that I'm iterating on. So it will be list recitable.append element after cleaning. Okay, so now that we have done this, then let's see what we will receive now. So I'm going to go ahead and say print group list like that. Okay, so if we go ahead and call this function outside of the function, prettify available minutes, and run our helpers.py file, let's see the result. So it is partially working, and the reason for that, it is because we never added the latest possible time range here. For example, when we iterate over the 62, then we should add 60, 61, 62, but we don't do it anywhere. And if we debug our program, let's see where it is stuck. Let's see why we don't see that. So I'm going to click here. You can see that this has been used as a breakpoint. I'm going to debug my program, and I'm going to press on F8 a lot of times now to see where the problem is. So F8. Okay, so I'm going to do this a couple of times until the position that I want to stop my program. So you can see that the current iteration is in the element 2. Okay, so we reached 60, so now I should expect Python to enter the else statement, and this is exactly what happens, right? You can see that the blue color is in line number 25, and in the next one you will see that the list recitable, which is here, should be empty in a bit. Okay, so we clean everything, so that's good. Okay, so now check out the list recitable. Okay, 60, 61, 62, but then the iteration finishes, right? So what we need to do is that we need to add one more time after the for loop the list recitable to the group list. So after I get out of my for loop, I should do group list dot append list recitable. Okay, and now things should work because I grabbed the last list recitable. If I execute that, stop and rerun, then you can see that this is the perfect result that we wanted. Alright, so now that we understood this, let's see how we are going to deal with the rest of the things here. So now that we have a group list, then we need to somehow convert minutes into time range strings, meaning that we need the exact opposite action of this function here. So that's why I can allow myself to create here one more helper function that will look like minutes to time range. And I can say that it is going to be a time range string because I don't want to return the actual time range object here. So this will receive m as a parameter, and I can use a document string here that will indicate what I'm doing. So I can say return a time range string in format of HH:MM, right? For the given integer, like that. Okay, so let's give an example also of what we are doing here. So if m is equal to 90, f equals to 90, then we should return. I'm just using this arrow syntax here, so it is just a good way to understand what we are doing. And this should return 01:30, right? This is what we want to reach at the end of this function. Alright, so for the hours, we should somehow grab the hour amount and also return it in a format that it will be 01, for example. So hour is going to be equal to m, but division with single / is not going to be enough here. because it will return us 1.5. We want only the 1. So I can use double forward slashes here, and to show that it's going to work very quickly, let me replace the dummy function that we printed here with the other function that we want to debug now, and m equals to 90, we will leave it here as it is. Before going forward, let's print the hour inside the function, and I will run my program, and you can see that we receive 1. M could be also equal to 119, the closest value to reach 2 hours. I will still receive 1, which is good. Okay, so continuing from here, now we want to print it in a format that it will be 01, and that is achievable by a nice formatted string trick that we can have here. So hour underscore string is going to be equal to a formatted string, and we will use hour, and then we are going to extend the formatting way of this hour integer. It's going to be by colon 0 to d. So this will say to the formatted string, always print your value with 2 digits, no matter what number you are using. So if we execute this, then you can see that we still receive 1, and that's because we did not print hour underscore string. Let's change that quickly. Okay, so you can see that we see 01 here, which is perfect. And now we are going to pretty much implement a similar logic to the minutes, and we should be good to go. So now for the minutes, actually the remainder of the received value here should be enough, right? If we say that minutes is equal to m, remainder of 60, then this should do the job for us. And to check that that's going to work, let me replace the print line here from hour string to minutes. You can see that we receive 59. But what will happen if our m is equal to a number like 65, right? So this should return something like that, but we will receive 015, right? You can see the 5 here. So I'm going to use the similar trick with the colon 02d for the minutes as well, and I'm just going to say that minute string is going to be equal to really the exact value, but I will replace the minutes with hours, and then I can finally finalize my return value. So I will return again a formatted string, and it will be hour string colon minutes string, right? And if we want to test this out for multiple values now, let's go ahead and do that. That is going to be useful for us to see that we have wrote a good function here. So I'm wrapping the minutes to TimeRange call function here with print line to see the result, because now we use return. If we run our program, you can see that the result is perfect. So for m 120, again good result. 180, good result. 100, 1439, perfect result. So the function is good. We have done a great job. Okay, so now that we have such a function, then let's see how we are going to benefit from that in our Prettify available minutes. If you remember, Prettify available minutes currently uses this dummy list here, but before changing that, let's use the minutes to TimeRange string function to convert those grouped lists into useful information. Again, calling this Prettify available minutes function here will show a result like the following, if you remember from the previous examples that we showed about this one. And besides that, it should return something like the following now. This is the desired state, right? First time range is that for the first list, and okay, so this is the first string, right? The second string should be something like that, right? So this is what we want to achieve now with the grouped list that we came up with. So I'm going to remove this one, and I'm going to remove the print here, and let's iterate over our group list. So for group in grouped list, let's go ahead and use the minutes to time range string to achieve the behavior. Now we can allow ourselves to use the first and the last element of the iterated lists here, right, in order to convert those. So start time for each iterated group is going to be equal to minutes to time range, and m is going to be equal to group index of 0, and the end time is going to be equal to minutes to time range string m group latest value, so -1 index. Okay, so now the time range of that is going to be equal to time range string. Let's use a separated variable. That's going to be equal to start time. Okay, formatted string for sure. Start time dash end time, like that. So this is the time range string, and we know that we have more than one group, so we need to return a list of time range strings. So again, pretty much the same logic, creating a list here, time ranges, a list, and then adding the time range strings to the time ranges list that we came up with. Okay, so time ranges dot append. Okay, we should append this definitely. Okay, so now that we have this, then this is a good time to test our code. So return time ranges, and then what we are going to do now is basically see if we have done a great job. I can use the print line and directly call the prettify available minutes, right? So if we run that, then you can see that this is the perfect result now. Okay, so now for those dummy times, meaning that not actual values of the time ranges, we receive a great result. But let's actually see the result for the friends, okay? For the actual friends that we set up some busy time ranges for them. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take this debugging line from here. I'm going to remove the L from here, and we are going to receive an L parameter, which always has to be a list. So I'm going to use a type hint here, and let's see if it is going to work for us. So back to our main.py file finally, and then we can basically import the function from the helpers. So let's use an import line in the first line, import helpers as h, and then h.prettify available minutes, and we will pass in available minutes. Of course, we need to print this. So let's go ahead and say that, you know what, this returns a list. So we want to iterate over this one again. So for tr as a time range, in this entire thing, print, and then let's print a nice message. You can meet in, and then for each time range, it will print in within a nice sentence. So we will relate to that tr. Let's see what we will have now. So a critical point in our entire project. If we run that, so I hope you are excited to see that result. Really works well, and you can see that we see you can meet in this time range and as well as this time range. Now it is a good time to test our program with more friends, right? Let's add some more guys here. So f3 is going to be equal to a friend. We can name this guy Michael. And we are going to add a couple of add busy ranges for this one. So time range, which the start time is going to be equal. Let's make a hard life to this program now. 17 inside the string. And the end time is going to be equal to 11 p.m. right? And allow me to remove those comments from here, which were, for example, right? Okay, so now what we expect to see? We expect to see from 14 to 16:59 and from 23 to 23:59, right? Let's see if that will happen. Okay, so perfect, right? You can see that since Michael is busy from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., then it did not show those times. Now I can also test this program with time collision, which means that two guys will have the same time ranges as busy time ranges. And actually we have this with Jim and Chris, but let's do this one more time with Chris. So I'm adding one more busy range for the Chris here, which will be a time range like the following. So Chris is going to be busy as well from 6 p.m. until 11:30 p.m. So that's going to be even more challenging to calculate. Okay, still good result. So it means that our code seems to be without any bugs, right? And of course, we could add a bunch of validations to this project. And why is that? Now, if one day one of your users of this project is going to add a busy range that will look like the following, from 17 to 14, this will crash our program because we don't have a validation that checks that the start time is really sooner than the end time. And those are just asserts that you can add. Those are just validation functions that you can add to make this program better. But this really works as expected, okay? If we delete that and let's add some more valid time ranges that are busy for Jim, from 2 to 6, for example. Let's check that so you can see that it really works. It really works as expected. Okay, so that is the perfect project to finish in a weekend. A lot of logic, a lot of data classes, a lot of object-oriented stuff. And I hope you really enjoyed in this one and hope that it wasn't too much complicated for you, although it was a long project that required a lot of thinking. So, hope you enjoyed in this one. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and also subscribe to my channel, and I will see you very soon.